The first day of astronomical summer is tomorrow. That means it's time for another visit from our resident astronomer, Dr. Chris Palma from the Penn State Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. He's also Associate Dean for undergraduate students in the Eberly College of Science. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you.
I've seen a lot lately about the search for life beyond Earth. So let's start there. First, within our own solar system, where are the observations pointing to as the most likely candidate if we were to find it in our solar system?
The icy moons of the outer planets. And so you might have thought I was going to say Mars, right? But there are these wonderful moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn. And from everything we can tell, it appears that they have subsurface ocean. And in particular, there's a moon of Saturn called Enceladus that is actually spewing out water into space. And just recently, we learned that that water, that ocean water, contains phosphorus, one of the ingredients for life.
So most folks would tend to focus on Mars, but instead go farther out and look for these moons. And along those same lines, we talked a few years ago about a Japanese spacecraft that literally grabbed a sample of dirt from an asteroid and brought it back to Earth. What's the latest from studying that sample?
Well, one, I want to start out and just talk about how unique that is, right? Like typically, we have to observe objects at a distance, or in the case of the moons of Saturn, we can send a robotic mission there, but we're still studying it at a distance. This is one of the only times we're actually bringing material back to Earth. And what they've found is that just like this moon of Saturn, the material that is made up of contains minerals that contain water and contains some really simple molecules that, again, seem to be the basis for living things. So I do want to say there's no evidence we found life, but we have found lots of places, asteroids, moons, where the chemical composition is right for life to be possible.
Got it. Let's talk about something that came out of your department recently involving what are called gamma ray bursts. Remind us what those are and what was the unique about this new observation.
Well, gamma ray is high energy light, so you can't see it with your own eyes. But if you could, I like to think a little bit like when you see lightning flashes and they light up the whole sky, right? So picture if you could see in gamma rays, you would see the entire sky light up. Huge brightness of this high energy light. So we've found thousands of these. They're very short duration, about 2 seconds long, but typically they give off about the same amount of energy. This one gave off 70 times more high energy light than any previous one of these. And so we think these are the creation of black holes. Like that's the only event that can really create that much energy. So why would one be brighter than all the others? And we think it's because the light comes at you in a jet. And so if the jet is a little bit off center, it looks a little bit fainter. But if it's pointed right directly at you, that's when you get this incredibly intense burst of energy.
So maybe you got lucky that it was pointed directly at Earth. The constellation Orion is generally a winter constellation for us, but I saw that one of the stars in the constellation has made news recently. Tell us about that.
Well, this is one of these fun and frustrating things about studying stars. So several hundred years ago, a couple of stars near enough to Earth exploded to the point where they were visible without a telescope. Most astronomers would love that to happen. It would be such an interesting thing to see in the sky, and it hasn't happened in any of our lifetimes. So Betelgeuse, from everything we can tell, should be the next one to do that. The problem is, all of the ways we would predict that are because of what's going on inside the star, and the outside of the star really disguises it. So we can't really tell how soon this is going to happen. But the outer part of Betelgeuse is changing just enough that we think that it could go supernova, it could explode soon. The question is, does soon mean tomorrow or 5,000 years from now?
Probably not tomorrow. And I think the best thing about that answer was I finally learned how to pronounce that star's name. I saw NASA released an amazing photograph recently. I guess it's called Pillars of Creation. Made me just geek out as a scientist. It's like, how could nature produce that? Could you comment on this image, which, if I understand, is partly from the Webb Space Telescope?
So like we were saying about gamma ray bursts, there's a lot of types of light you can't see with your own eye. X-rays, infrared light, ultraviolet light. So Webb measures the infrared light from these objects. There's another telescope called the Chandra X-ray Observatory that measures the X-rays. And what we do is we just overlay pictures. So it's just like if you're a pro at using Photoshop, picture like essentially we're photoshopping, but we're just overlaying an X-ray image, an infrared image, and a visible light image. And it brings out detail that you wouldn't otherwise see with just a picture with a regular camera.
Got it. And we sometimes do that in meteorology with visible and infrared pictures. So as always, we like to close by giving you a chance to tell us what cool things you'll be looking at in the night sky in the weeks to come.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to encourage everybody. We've talked, I think, recently even about which planets are in the sky, Venus, Mars. But I had some folks up on the roof of Davy Lab the other night, and we just used a very small telescope to look at Venus, the brightest object in the sky after sunset. Right now, it's in its phase that looks like the quarter moon. So if you were to use a small pair of binoculars to look at Venus, it wouldn't look like a full disk. It would look half of it lit. So I really encourage people, pull out those old binoculars, look at Venus. If you can find it, right next to it will be the planet Mars around sunset. And for those of you, again, who are those early risers, if you're up at 5 a.m., look in the eastern sky and you're going to start to see Jupiter.
Very nice. Dr. Chris Palma, Penn State Department of Astronomy and Astrophysics. Always nice to welcome him back as we begin a new astronomical season. That'll do it for this portion of the show. We'll be back in a moment with more.